Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Sanibel Island Online Writers Conference. It is my very great pleasure to introduce two of my favorite voices on writing for this session. They're the hosts of Writing Class Radio, which is a podcast of a writing class. And a podcast of a writing class, you say? Like, how could that ever work? Well, if you've listened to any of their 115 episodes across 12 seasons, you would know. And if you haven't, you should definitely check them out. So without any further ado, I'm going to get out of the way here and put you in the very capable hands of Andrea Askowitz and Allison, the two hosts of Writing Class Radio. They're all yours, ladies.
Oh my God. When he tells a story about, like, when he introduces us, I'm like, wow, we've done so much. I get so excited.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jason. You guys, I am so excited to be here. I love the Sanibel Island Writers Conference. And I keep thinking next year in Sanibel, like next year in Jerusalem. So let's hope for next year in Sanibel.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to give us a layout of the land. So what we're going to do for the next 50 minutes, and whoever said that writing wasn't therapy, here we are having a 50-minute hour. We're going to talk about how to find your story, and we have some ideas. We're going to give you a quick little writing prompt. Actually, we're going to do 2 writing prompts, and then we're going to go through our favorite top 10, 11 tips for how to make your writing awesome. And we want you to put comments in the chat. We want it to be as interactive as possible. All right, that's what we're going to do. Thanks for being here. So do you want to talk about how to find your story?
Should we not just give the prompt first and then go into it, or you want to start with some tips?
No. All right, let's just do the prompt.
Yeah,
okay,
I want to.
But there are different ways to find your story. But today we're going with this, the prompt. List what annoys you. And I'm going to do a really quick, I'm not going to tell you how long, but it's going to be like less than a minute. List what annoys you. And you know what? That's polite. List what fucking bums you out or what just drives you fucking crazy. Go. Stop.
That's so quick.
That was 45 seconds.
Oh, dear God. You couldn't give us a full minute?
No, we have a lot to cover. Okay. So if anyone wants to write in the, you know what? I have to go to the comments. If anyone wants to write in the comments what bugs them, what annoys them, let's hear yours, Allison.
Okay, so haters, like when people are super rude, I really hate that. Like, for instance, my kids are always like, where did the housekeeper put my shirt? She sucks. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Do your own laundry then. Like, so it really annoys me when people talk shit about other people who are doing nice things for them. People who can't take a left at a red light, you know how when it turns red and they can't turn, they need the arrow. That drives me insane.
Like when they don't get in the middle before they turn,
like,
I get, yeah.
Plop. Mm-hmm. Drives me crazy. When my kids leave dishes in the sink or like stuff all over the counters, I'm like, if you're going to cook, clean up. I don't work for you. And then people who are racist, like haters, just that's back into the rudeness. It just drives me crazy. I just hate that. What about you?
I have leaf blowers. They are driving me insane lately. And I've learned that they're a lot more dangerous than we even know. or that I had previously known, they're really bad for the environment. One leaf blower half hour blowing is like driving a big bus like from here to Orlando. It's that bad. Okay. When someone says, I'll be there at 5 and then 5 hours later. When someone says your couch is in the van and then I call a week later, so I'm getting a couch delivered and then they're like, sorry, it didn't make it in the van. Just when people, and then I wrote everything because I'm
menopause.
I don't understand. Yeah. Okay. So let's see what other people wrote. Pickles?
Tap dancing.
Funny.
That's a good one.
What?
Tap dancing. Somebody's neighbor upstairs is taking tap dancing over his head.
People that chew with their mouth open. Delaney Foss. People in general.
So where do we go from here? So now that we have these, what do we do?
We keep this list, and then this is what I want you guys to do right now. Look at your list and circle the one on your list that you least want to think about. The one that you can't even think about it because it's totally upsetting or disgusting or whatever it is. Okay, circle that one. And then we're going to do another writing prompt right now. And what we're going to do is just have you start writing this story. And it's going to go really fast because I'm timing you. And it's just like, since it's not that interactive, I just want you to start with that. Circle the one that you don't want to deal with. That's the one that we want you to write to. Okay? Go. Stop. Stop? Allison's not stopping.
No, because I got to finish the sentence. I didn't even get to the who, what, when, where.
This is what always happens in class. Okay. Finish that sentence. Yeah. Good idea.
No.
Okay. So this is one way to get to a story, is to write down the things that annoy you. Other ways are to write down a list of things you're obsessed with, or write a list of things that you don't understand. Or another really good, important way to get to your story is to write about something that hurt you. These are all really good ways to just get started. If you're like, hey, I want to write, but I don't know what to write about. And then you have lists of things to write about. And if you can come back to these lists over and over, and you can also rewrite them because you'll have different obsessions or different things will annoy you at different times. So this is just one way. And also, we have daily prompts on our website, writingclassradio.com. And, I think it's really exciting to write to a prompt, even if you're like, that prompt is weird or not interesting, because you just never know what's going to come out. So we love writing to prompts.
And I took a class once where the woman said, the teacher said, if you think of something that's bugging you or you're like, oh, I really need to write about that, just write it down on a little piece of paper and throw it in a bag. And then when you do have time, you can just pick it out of a bag and it may jog your memory back to that moment. And because a lot of people get blank in class, I have a first draft class, which is on Tuesdays from 12 to 1. Let me throw the little plug out there in case there's anybody who has the time, 12 to 1 Eastern time. It's a great way to get into like a quick little, we write to a prompt. There's a group there. We can get feedback and share. And there's something about sharing it after you've written it and really just setting the intention and the time to do it that gets you going. Because people are like, well, I don't know what to write about. Well, you can know it, but you have to actually do it. And I think these classes are helpful. You can get on like Andrea said, get on our daily prompts. There's books everywhere about daily prompts or prompts and stuff. So don't poo-poo that. It's really, really helpful. And good things come out of it. Like just the other day, one of our students wrote something to a prompt. We all were like, oh my God, that's so good.
And the prompt was favorite article of clothing. And I was like, what kind of prompt is that? I judged your prompt.
I know. Well, you always know.
No, I don't. And then one of our students, Lucy Frost, busted out with a story that she then got published the next day.
Crazy.
So cool.
Yeah. So you never know. You got to just do it. Okay. Let's hear what you wrote.
Really? Or okay.
Why not?
I don't know. Okay. Here's what I wrote. I am annoyed by everything. I am annoyed by myself. Delaney Foss said, I'm annoyed by people. Me too. And this annoys me because a people hater is not who I want to be. What happened to everyone's doing their best?
So immediately I'm like, when did this start? How did this happen? Have you always been like this? Like I had all these questions. Like I wanted to know, like I wanted to be grounded a little bit better. And because we only had 1/2 of a millimeter of a second to do this.
A minute and a half.
We don't get to that point yet, right? So I'm kind of like, I always like to get people writing for at least 10, 12 minutes because I feel like you can go, wait, where is this going? Why am I writing about this? You can start asking yourselves the questions that help the story along.
All right. Well, yep. Let's hear yours then.
Oh yeah. Mine's total crap. Yeah. I didn't get there either. Traffic makes me crazy because I like to be on time. Being stuck behind somebody who doesn't pull into the intersection, then can't make the turn without a signal can have me screaming, what the fuck, learn how to drive as I push on the horn.
Well, we do know that here's a narrator who likes to be on time. So we know that so far. We also know that she's someone that's going to scream in the car. So we don't want to be around this driver in traffic. Here's a road rager on our hands. So we do know some things about this narrator. And this takes us to, I think this is tip number 1. Can we see what tip number 1? So we're trying to get to, yeah, that's why we did this. Okay. Tip number 1, ground the reader.
So in neither of our stories, do you know like how old we are, where we live, what's going on in our lives? Like right now it's just too soon. But do you want to share like one of those published pieces?
Yeah, I do. But I do want to say that even in a minute and a half, we do know a little bit about so Allison's narrator is someone who likes to get places on time. She's in traffic. We don't know the what or the when quite yet, but we're getting there. So we already do have a little sense of that narrator. Okay. So I just like looked through like some of my favorite stories that we've studied, and all of them set up the story with who, what, where, and when. And they do it in a way that is, and I think, very captivating, so that we know as readers if we're interested in following along, like if we want to get into the car with that narrator. Okay, so here's one of my favorite stories by David Sedaris. It's called The End of the Affair. On a summer evening in Paris, Hugh and I went to see The End of the Affair, a Neil Jordan adaptation of the Graham Greene novel. I had trouble keeping my eyes open because I was tired and not completely engaged. Hugh had trouble keeping his eyes open because they were essentially swollen shut. He sobbed from beginning to end, and by the time we left the theater, he was completely dehydrated. I asked if he always cried during comedies, and he accused me of being grossly insensitive, a charge I'm trying to plea bargain down to simply obnoxious. Okay. So right away, so this was in a book. So I think he would have said, my husband, Hugh, if it was a standalone piece. But by the time you read this in his book, you already know that. So you know that here's a man with his partner. That's the who. What? Someone who's not crying in a movie, or someone who like is self-deprecating and knows his role in relation to his partner. Where? Paris, movie. We don't know when yet, but we soon find out that this is a couple that's been together for a very long time. I'm in.
It's a great setup. Like, you're like, okay, what's going on? What happened? What's with these people? Like, you care about the narrator. He draws you in just enough at the beginning to get you interested. And that's super important.
Right. That's why we like the who, what, where. The why comes later. Should I read one more?
Yeah. And then
Okay.
we'll get to number 2.
Okay. This one is The Wig, which is by Brady Udall, which we love. And it's so short. The whole story is like 500 words or 400. Okay. My 8-year-old son found a wig in the garbage dumpster this morning. I walked into the kitchen, highly irritated that I couldn't make a respectable knot in my green paisley tie. And there he was at the table, eating cereal and reading the funnies. The wig pulled tightly over his head like a football helmet. The wig was a dirty bush of curly blonde hair, the kind you might see on a prostitute or someone who is trying to imitate Marilyn Monroe. So we know that here's a man, dad. We know dad with son. Where? Kitchen. What? Facing his son wearing a dirty wig. We don't know why. And that's what we're about to find out. And it is such a gorgeous, beautiful, heartbreaking story that unfolds in literally 400 words. But who isn't interested from that?
Can you talk for a second about some people who don't set up like that and how confusing it is?
Yeah. So there's this sort of tendency where people think it's very clever, I guess, to just like drop the reader into a scene or in dialogue when you don't yet know the players. And I don't know. I think that no one's going to stick with that, especially now in today's like climate where everyone's like flying past, like, you know, people are reading on their phones probably. I don't know. In my mind, it's so important to really tell us who, tell us what, tell us when, tell us where, so that we can decide whether or not we want to go for the ride.
Yeah, let's get right to number 2. Write like you speak. Yeah, tip number 2, write like you speak. And that's one of our favorite ones. Let me just for a second, like when I read something that has good voice, I'm totally in. They could mess up the punctuation. They could do it. If I can hear their voice, I'm totally in. If they're talking out of my, like, I'm not that smart. So if they're talking over my head and trying to be super literary, and so I'm already going to be like, no, this isn't for me. That said, if you are super smart and that's your thing and you use big words, then just use them, because probably you're not talking to me anyway. But I think it's important to write like you speak, because voice is so important to a piece, especially now. Some of these things I see get published, I'm like, it's not even that good of a story, but I don't know. I like the voice, so I stuck around.
I used to think of write like you speak. I think of it as a good tip because people tend to get writerly, like you said, and then they use big words that probably aren't really their words. But an interesting thing happened. I was just remembering this. An interesting happened in Sanibel, in a class at Sanibel a few years ago, where I gave a prompt, and a young woman she was young. She wrote to the prompt and then read out loud. And her voice was very, like, you could tell by the story that, like, no punctuation, no capitals. She spoke like, I can't even mimic the voice. It was sort of like a mix of like Valley, that's how old I am, and like just like youth. And there was an older man in the class who was like, got pissed because he was like, kids today, like they don't use punctuation. But there was something so authentic and so true to her voice in that story. Like I really loved it. Even though he was also right, like it probably didn't have punctuation. So I don't know. I just thought about that today. I think
somebody asked, do you have any advice for finding your voice in writing? And we actually do have very good advice. And Andrea and I talk about this all the time. We talk about it in our classes. The best way is to open an email and address it to your best friend and just tell them the story, and you will find your voice right there. So every time you start to write, talk to your friend, right? Mm-hmm. Talk to your friend, and it will flow.
Yeah, that's the best advice. Cool.
And you guys, if anybody wrote anything they would like to share, feel free to put it in the comments so we can talk about it and maybe help further you in your writing, help give some advice. But let's keep moving with our tips. So another one we always talk about is omit needless words. How important is that, especially in this day and age? You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Omit needless words sort of works on two levels, like on a sentence level. So like a sentence needs to be as tight as possible, and every word needs to like do its work. Also, omitting needless words is like a sort of an idea that works on a full story level. So once you figure out what your story is about, and that's one of our tips later, it's so important to go back through your story on a second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th draft and take out parts that don't serve the story. Is number 4, what's your story about?
No.
Darn it. Damn it. Why didn't we fix that?
No, what your story about is way down at the end. And there's a reason for that.
Oh, there is?
Yes.
Oh, no, it is. Figure out what your story's about. Tech is good. They just switched that around. I don't know. Okay. I think we should talk about what our story's about, what the story is about. Yep. All right. Because I think not only write like you speak and figuring out what your story is about, those are the most important elements of storytelling. And the first one is because we're getting to the truth. But figuring out what your story is about is the thing that makes your story, elevates your story from like, this is just a thing that happened to me, to like, this is something that's worthy of other people reading, that's worthy of publication, that brings storytelling to a higher art. I thought you were going to make fun of me for saying art. Yeah. But it's true. No, I mean, writing is not just like, journal writing is excellent, and I totally am in. I think people should write in their journals, but I'm talking about stories that get published. And why did they get published? Because the narrator has come to say something bigger than just, I slipped on a banana peel.
And that is one of our biggest pet peeves. People send us stories all the time to put on the podcast, and I'm reading, the writing's great, the whole thing. They're talking about the situation and la, 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 and then you get all the way to the end and it's just over. And I'm like, what? I just read this whole thing and there's no story here. So I have to see how the narrator has changed. What did the narrator learn from all this, from whatever situation it is? And that is the most important. So the reason why I think Andrea wants to move it to number 4 is because the rest of it really doesn't matter. And also those tangents and what you're writing has to directly serve what that story's about. And if it doesn't, yes, your life is important, but write about that in a different essay. You belong in here. So you can't be off, because then the reader doesn't know what to focus on.
Right. Exactly. So when you're crafting a story, You set the story up with who, what, where, when, and then those details lead your reader to what the story is ultimately about, which is the thing that you've come to say. It's the way that you've changed. It's what you've learned. And that's why, that's why I wanted to move that up, because then when you move up the idea, when you figure out the idea of what you've come to say, then it's easier to get rid of things that don't matter, and so it's easier to omit needless words.
Okay, so Kaden is asking how do you balance omitting needless words with writing variants in sentence structure and flow?
What does that mean, variants?
I'm not sure. I guess just not having it be so one-dimensional, like not like exactly the same thing. Maybe the person's trying to find out like how do you give it structure, and
or maybe Caden's asking how do you vary your sentences, and maybe we should ask Caden to re-ask
longer and shorter sentences. Well, I mean, you can first of all, if you're writing a long sentence, to have it be long, but you could have put all that in a shorter sentence. Bye.
That's okay. That's what Kaden was asking.
But what it is you've got to be writing about what your story is about. So you can't be writing about being born in another country and taking a shuttle or a ferry, and if it has your story has nothing to do with that, right? If getting to the United States is not your story, well, we don't really need the travel plans. We just want to know what happened when you got here. You left.
I think Caden's asking about like sentence on a sentence level. And I do think it's important to like look at your sentences and to vary them. Like short sentences work really well, especially if you're like in a moment that's very, we have this, I don't know if it's one of our tips right now, but hot topic cold prose. It's a really good idea in moments when something is very tense to use short sentences that just report. And then it's good in, yes, I can definitely vouch for that being true.
There's another question here that's really good, and I want to answer it. How do you keep the idea short? How do you keep it from becoming a novel? I have a problem with my ideas getting out of control. You write it over and over and over, and each time you take out something that maybe, doesn't matter. It works well without it, because we've said this your whole life. Okay, so you're going through this really traumatic thing and it's terrible and it's awful, but every time you write a story where you have to introduce that to make it clear, it has to get shorter and shorter. So like, for instance, I would say I had kids by myself, right? Well, there's a whole story about that. I chose to have children. I was 36. I chose to have children by myself before I ran out of eggs, right? So that is a whole story in itself. But if that's not what the story I'm telling, but I want to let the reader know that I'm a single mother, basically by choice, then I have to include something. But I say just enough to satisfy the reader so that they know, and then you move on with your story.
Good. Also, I would like to say that every story, a memoir is not an autobiography. And an essay is not it's not your full life story. So take one moment and explain that one moment. And every single story can be boiled down to a line or two. That's sort of sad, but true.
It's tragic, but it's true. Your whole miserable first 50 or whatever, something tragic. I lost my daughter, like that. And I somehow now I can put that in one sentence, and it was just the roughest thing in my whole life, but it's one sentence now.
But Allison, it took you a long, long time of writing it very long and then rewriting it like you said before. Yeah.
And there's something that happens with space. So as you move away from the pain of whatever you're going through, some of the details blur and you realize maybe they're not as important as you thought, but really just perspective changes the sentence.
What's our next tip? Tech? Stakes. Best way to figure out what the story is about is to ask, what is at stake? What is there to win or lose? Why do I care? And this gets to what has the narrator come to say? What's the story about? But these are some good questions to ask yourself to figure it out.
And there's people send us a story with a happy ending and not much happens. And it's like, okay, I'm happy for you, but it's not a story. It's like no one really cares that everything, I don't know. You want to
let's talk about me. Let me, I have an example that Allison does not care about. Okay.
Please don't tell the chicken joke. I know someone asked for it. Do not tell the chicken joke.
Someone asked for it again?
Can you believe that?
So good. It's on one of our episodes that I can't remember, but the chicken joke is out there on Writing Class Radio. Okay. So here's, okay. What is something what is something for any storytelling that stakes are required to care for the characters? Stakes are required in every single story. Okay. So let me give you an example of a story I'm working on. It's, so I feel like I'm aging at, I know. So already Allison hates the story. Wait, but I think I'm going to be able to like bring Allison in to care. Basically, okay, I'm aging at a rapid, I feel like I'm aging on like time-lapse photography, like at warp speed. I'm 53 years old. All of a sudden I'm like, everything is like, I go like this, hi, and then I pull a muscle. Like that shit's been happening to me for the last year. Okay. So I wrote this story and Allison's like, I don't fucking give a shit. Who cares?
Kill it.
Kill it. Move on. Write something else. Okay. So then I was like, oh.
Allison hates it. It must be something.
Yeah. Right. Actually, no. My bar is to make Allison think it's interesting. Okay. So if Allison thinks it's boring, then I'm like, okay, I'm having a problem here because maybe it is boring. But then I started to really ask myself, why do I care that I am getting injured every time I stand up? Or like, you know, why do I care that, like, I swear my teeth are like losing their enamel? Why does that matter to me? Okay.
So Lord.
What?
Nobody click off. I swear it gets better.
I think it gets better because what I came to is I feel like I'm losing my identity. There's something about me, Andrea, being like connected to myself physically. Like I was always an athlete growing up. There was this one time where I was like crossing a river with my family and there was a baby involved. And even though my brother was there, who's 6 feet tall, the river started rushing rapids really fast and it was like slick rock. And someone handed the baby to me. Like I was that person who was like sure of foot, solid ground, the strong one. Is anyone going to hand a baby to me now? Probably not. Okay, so, but still, why does anyone?
Part of the story? See, this
yes.
is the thing. This is for all you people out there. Cut. This story is too long.
What?
To be in the story.
Okay, I'm arguing that this is part of the story because this is the story. This is the part that shows who I was, and who I was matters to me. This story might end up getting killed ultimately, but I really do think that a story about aging is not really a story at all, unless it's a story about loss of identity, because that is something that other people can understand. Some people hook their identities on work or on being a mom and then their children go away or whatever. So now I have a story that has like a more universal connection, even though the specifics are mine alone. I am the only one that I literally got like this big Popeye thing, which happens to people when they injure this muscle if they're over 50. That like shit. Okay. So anyway, I need to make this story interesting. I need to only talk about the physical parts. And then maybe if I do it well enough, it's a story that other people can understand because it's a story about loss of identity.
So maybe it'll go someplace other than AARP.
It could. It should be able to.
I like the identity aspect. I don't think that was in the draft that I tried to kill. And I love that because sometimes you need to have somebody read it and be like, I don't like it. I don't see it, for you to really understand that you're going in the wrong direction.
No, but basically what you said to me was, I don't give a shit. This is boring. And I thought, okay, it probably is because I hadn't done the work yet. I hadn't gone deep. I hadn't asked myself, why? Why am I writing this? Why do I care? And now I'm kind of getting to it. And this is the writing class radio process. It's like write, rewrite. You don't know what your story is about sometimes at the beginning. And then you rewrite, and then a story emerges. And then once that story emerges, so I had this whole bit about like my period and how strong it used to be. I know. And basically you're right. This story is not about my like super flow. No, I don't need that anymore. And I don't need the part about not remembering when my last period was, because it's not about my memory. It's about my physical body. So I'm getting to the story. Thanks for letting me talk about that. I needed that. Thank you.
This is the kind of stuff that
writing
happens
classes therapy
in our classes. And it's really important because being in a writing group and talking about it and really, sharing your work and getting feedback is so important, because writing in a bubble, and I mean, unless you're like John Grisham or something, I mean, it's impossible. You need motivation. You need people to say like, oh my God, that's really good, or really, I don't like it. And I'll tell Andrea all the time, like, this story is not about A, it's about B. And she's like, you're wrong. And because she really wants it to be about A. So if you really are trying to write something about A, but somebody thinks it's about B, you need to rework your piece. You need to get it. You need to have only the things in there that matter, that direct it towards A.
Yep. Sylvia Nieves is really confused about what this has to do with the chicken joke. And we'll get to the chicken joke later, because the chicken joke is a really good example of, it's a good example of omitting needless words and ending your sentences on the strongest note. But what's our next tip? I feel like we're running out of time. Oh, yeah. Create a reliable, what?
Okay, I must have like a different list. What happened to like show and tell? Are we doing that? No? All right, let's just keep, I'm going to just go with it. I'm going to stop being controlling. Sorry.
Yeah. We have a controlling narrator on our hands. Okay, create a reliable, vulnerable narrator. Why does that matter?
You want me to go?
Sure, tell us.
Okay, so if you're not the biggest asshole in your story and you're ranting on other people, we hate you and we're not reading to the end. And we don't trust you, because everybody's multidimensional. We're not all good. We're not all bad. And you have to set the stage for being a trustworthy, reliable, vulnerable narrator. So for instance, like when I was teaching in prison and I would ask these guys, what's the worst thing you've ever done? If they're like, oh, and I got, wrongfully convicted and I did this, and I'm thinking, well, you're in prison, so how'd you get here? So they have to talk about some of the things that they did leading up to whatever happened, good or bad. And it's important. And you can't try to glaze over that. You just have to be honest, and you have to tell your story. And as soon as you do, everyone will love you. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, it's true. Even no matter how big the bad thing is that you did is, if you admit it, and if you admit it right, then your readers will trust you and love you. It makes me think of, like, don't tell the story about how you were cheated on. Tell the story about how you were the cheater. That's the more honest story. That's the story that that we all need to hear, because we've all been the cheater.
The narrator, the reader always cares. If somebody said, Madeline Champa says, I worry that readers would prefer a mysterious and unreliable narrator over the most honest narrators.
Not in personal essay. No, that's mystery. That's a different genre. So we are writing the truth here. And we're writing the truth because that's why we write, so that we can figure out the truth for ourselves, and that we can then understand each other through telling the truth. I mean, the truth has become a harder thing to write, like of late, but I still believe in it. I do.
Well, I mean, your example of The Independent, what happened to you, we're not going to bring it all up, but Andrea got published and she told an honest story. And there was like, it kind of reeked of privilege, even though that is her life. That's many of our lives, right? And so they basically got reamed on social media and canceled. So how does that feel, when that happens? And how does that make you move forward in life? How do you then write?
I think you just keep writing and trust and hope for the best. Yeah.
But you have to be, so going back, talking about like, being vulnerable, you also could have done things differently in that piece and you learned. So that's what I'm saying. You can still be honest, but you can also.
Right. True. Yeah. You don't have to reveal everything about yourself, but you must reveal some things that are pertinent. And that was vague, but that's the truth. So what's next? Tech 7. Oh, okay.
Chicken.
Okay. So ending your sentences, paragraphs, and the story on the strongest note. It's like everyone wants a story with a landing. Like you throw your arms up, it's the end of your gymnastics routine. Jokes do this really well. And the reason it matters is because the last thing you hear read is the thing that sticks. So, you can even go through all your sentences and maybe even turn them around so that they land better. So let me try to tell the chicken joke. So I don't know why sometimes it's hard for me. I get it wrong. I definitely think this whole panel is about getting down to the truth of our writing. It's true. Exactly. We're writing our truth. Okay. Why did the chicken cross the road?
Oh, to get to the other side.
No, to get to your house. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
The chicken!
Now you guys know why I told her, please don't tell that joke this year.
Okay, that's my favorite joke. And I love it so much because it does show why this is the thank you. Because
it's classes, we're like this all the time. I'm usually wrong and she's usually right, but then she usually comes around.
What? Okay, whatever she's saying. Okay, I want to talk about the chicken joke and why it's so good. It's because it's so succinct. It only uses the fewest number of words. It lands on the chicken. It's so, it does this other thing that comedy is perfectly, it's like a perfect comedy device because it tells you something you already knew, but that you were also surprised that you already knew. But that's getting into comedy writing, and that's a different thing. I can't handle the comments at the same time. Okay, thanks for listening to my joke. I love it so much. All right, what's next? Show and tell. Can you make a movie of that sentence?
So people always say show, don't tell. And we've tried through experiments to see if it's better to show, don't tell, or to show and tell. And we prefer show and tell. And Andrea, why is that?
Well, showing really is a great way of, showing is like dialogue. Showing is scene. And when you're showing in storytelling, you really are like, your reader is picturing a movie. Oh, remember that? That's movie. TV.
Charade.
Okay, so your reader is picturing what you're describing, and that's the type of stuff that sticks. But what's really cool about writing is that you also have, because you have paper, you have the opportunity to tell how you're feeling and to tell what's going on. So why not utilize both? We actually did do a writing, I think we have an episode about it, where we had our students just tell and we had our students just show. And it was so hard. Like naturally we show and tell. So that's what we prefer in storytelling all around.
But definitely, the dialogue and the thought bubble is extremely important because I always say it's like going to a cocktail party and you know how you're talking and people are telling you what they want you to hear. What I want to know is the thought bubble, like what's underneath that. And that's the part that draws us closer to our characters and our narrator. So that's what's so important.
Well, what you're describing is actually a really cool writing exercise is to like show a conversation. So dialogue is showing. You're in the room with the characters and then add the thought bubbles. That's a really cool writing exercise. Okay, they're moving us along. Like what? The more specific, the more universal.
So that's really something similar to what you said today about what you're working on, your aging piece. So it's very specific, but the more specific that you get in your writing, the more detailed. So if you go to the grocery store, instead of just saying you went down the milk aisle and picked out milk, you could tell us you bought, unsweetened almond milk. But sometimes you get macadamia nut milk. I mean, you probably don't want to get too crazy, but we want to know.
But you do want to get that crazy if you're Allison Langer and you care that much about health.
Yeah.
And because that detail reveals the type of narrator that Allison Langer is.
Yeah. So without having to say, like, I'm a little crazy when it comes to health, by showing it as I go down the grocery aisle or unpacking my bag, boom, you get it.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
We are really moving us along. Okay.
Yeah, I know. We have 5 more minutes. Okay. Read your story out loud. If something sounds awkward, edit and cut. Yep. That one doesn't need explaining. Read your story out loud. It's so good to read it to someone. You can read it to yourself. You can hear it when you're saying it. Yeah.
And edit. You got to edit. You can't, like, sometimes people they'll come to class and we'll be like, oh, change this and this. They'll send it back to us in like 10 minutes. And we're like, no.
Yeah. No, it's taken me 2 weeks to figure out that I don't need that whole period part. Because now I'm figuring out what my story's about. So it takes time. You got to sit with your story, put it aside, bring it back, go sentence by sentence, and then edit out the parts you don't need. And then bring in parts you do need.
Yeah.
Isn't there one more? Yeah. All right. Get into a writing group. So this is our public service announcement moment. But
it's so good. Everyone who's in our classes loves them. For $25 a month, you can take a live online writing class. It is online. Somebody asked that earlier. Every Tuesday from 12 to 1 Eastern time. You sign up on Patreon. You can go to our website, writingclassradio.com, and you can find out all the information. But you jump on Patreon, you sign up, you show up. It's online. You get to meet other writers. And it's just great. And then we have another class on Thursdays for people who are in that class. That is a second draft. So it helps you get to another draft. And how does that work? And you get to read it out loud and you get like 20 minutes to really get feedback and all that kind of stuff. This class is smaller and more intimate. And then there's a final draft class. And that one is 2 hours long. And again, that kind of combines both. You get to do a prompt, you get to write, and it's a longer, it's like 2 months, and it's with the same people for 2 months. And it's just, well, the same people who keep taking it. I've been doing that too now for like 12 years. So you get into it and it's very hard to get out because it's so good for your writing. And you meet these people and you fall in love with them and everybody's encouraging. It's the best thing ever.
We're throwing out a lot of information, and I want to ask you guys to put your email in the chat. If you don't already receive information from Writing Class Radio, please put your email in the chat, and I'll send you a list of our classes that we offer. And I promise you, like, I hardly ever send out e-blasts, so you'll get something like once every other month. We also have a free publishing guide that tells you how to get your stories, like how to format your stories. There's a template for how to write the pitch letter, where to send your stories, all that's in there. So please put your email in the chat, or just go to
our podcast. 115 episodes so far, and it's free, right? Anywhere you get your podcast, we always have a story. Sometimes we have agents on there. Sometimes we have authors on there, but there's always a personal story and some analysis about the story. So you can hear these really good stories and learn how to write yours better. So it's really cool. We take submissions. We have all our submission guidelines on our website. And before we finish, I have to talk about the prison series that we just launched. So I taught writing in prison, memoir writing in a men's prison here in Miami for 3 years. And I still keep in touch with a lot of the guys that I taught. Many of them have been transferred daily. We communicate through the email prison system, and they send in their stories. So they have stories, and some of them were actually able to record their own. So you get to hear their voice, and it's super cool. We got stories from around the country of other incarcerated or formerly incarcerated people. And they're sharing their lives. And it's really cool because these thoughts that we have about our prison system and the guys in it might be a little changed after you listen to their stories. There was one other thing we were going to ask for. What was it? We were going to tell people. Now I can't remember.
Free publishing guide submissions and prison series. We got it.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? I think we still have 5 minutes before they cut us off.
Do we? No, I don't think so. But if you have any questions, we're open until they cut us off with the hook. I think we're done. It's 50 minutes.
It is? Oh my God, you guys, this was so much fun. I'm like looking at all the people so I can see what they're saying. Thank you so much. No, you guys, thank you so much.
Loved it.
If anyone has any questions, just throw them up there.